Okay, it's 12 noon. The witching hour has arrived. So I'd like to call the Council Priorities Committee meeting to order and ask for a motion to approve the agenda. Okay, there any additions or changes? Bob? No? Okay.
Madam Chair, I would going to recluse myself from the discussion. I wish you the very best in your deliberations and funding these very worthwhile organizations. My wife works for the fair and sells popcorn there. No, she does a bit more than that, so I'm going to recluse myself from the discussions. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion to approve the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so items for discussion, B1, community grants. I assume, Mr. Tumalello, you would like to speak to that.
I have a presentation to make. So thank you for this opportunity. Basically, you have a package in front of you. The motion that was passed at the April 1st, 2019 regular afternoon council meeting was that a review of community grant criteria process be referred to a future council priorities committee prior to the 2020 community grant application process. I've provided in the council package a whole bunch of materials that basically this presentation will be a synopsis of. So to begin with, I'd like to give a historical perspective. As far back as the 1950s, the Township of Langley provided funding to community groups requesting support of projects and events in the community. In those early years, requests for funding came to council by way of delegations or letters. There was no emails back then. Grants were awarded by special council resolution in consideration of the purpose for which the funds would be used in the community. In the late 1982, a grants policy was adopted and a formal application process was established. Criteria were formed to ensure accountability and a fair and objective distribution of dollars. However, not all criteria were stipulated on the standard application form. Instead, council directed that a notice be placed in the paper informing that applicants should include full financial statement, an up-to-date membership list, a copy of their constitution and bylaws, and unless otherwise received, council would not consider their applications. That required list of members appeared to have been an important part of the criteria, as council only gave funds to those organizations who served the Township of Langley and could prove that 75% of their members were residents of the township. In 1992, council received a report from staff about groups based in Langley that were regional in nature, but not having the required percentage of township residents. Staff advised that funding such organizations would greatly increase the number of groups qualifying and would put great pressure on council to fund more than the budget allowed. In 1995, community groups came forward to council expressing difficulty in meeting that criteria of requiring 75% of members being township residents. In 1996, the grant policy was amended to change the resident requirement from 75 to 50% for tax exemption purposes. In 1997, grant applications reflected that the percentage of membership change was made to all grant categories beyond permissive tax exemptions. While most criteria were amended or changed over the years, Township has had a formal grants policy. 3 items remain consistent to present day. 1, that grant recipients must prove that other funding avenues have been pursued. 2, that the grant funds will not be used for administrative purposes. 3, that preference will be given to groups whose applications show a great deal of volunteer support. In 2010, Council conducted a review of township grants criteria and the application process and asked staff to provide a comparison to other municipalities. A staff presentation on community grants was provided on December 9th, 2010 to the Council Priorities Committee meeting, and several issues and ideas were discussed. 2 items were discussed in earnest. 1, the need to restrict capital improvement grants to bona fide community halls, each having a revert to township clause in their bylaws. And the second, the need to apply existing grant criteria to manage the number of applications being received for a very limited pool of funds. At that meeting, Council also expressed a desire to build stronger, more vibrant communities and to better support major community events. At the January 31st, 2011 regular afternoon meeting of Council, 2 new categories were added to our offerings, including a major festivals grant and a nothing without effort grant. Criteria remain relatively unchanged, other than requiring groups to state how they are contributing to the township's sustainability goals. There was also a reaffirmation of bona fide community halls qualifying for community grants, improvement grants. In 2016, Council again reviewed criteria, making further adjustments to better reflect prior funding intentions and grant processes. Fine-tuning and improving the understanding of required conditions ensures a higher level of accountability on the part of grant recipients and improves staff's ability to provide fair and unbiased recommendations. Adjustments to criteria also occurred in 2017, 2018, and 2019. This in line with trying to get our grants into an online application process. For 2019, Council approved $235,000 in funding for 67 community groups and individuals who met criteria and provided all the required supporting documents. Council also approved $146,000 in funding to 5 groups outside of criteria. Township funds up to should be $113,000 through special incentive initiative programs, including sports hosting, heritage incentives, neighborhood improvement, and gender equity programs. Township of Langley also administers a grant to Tourism Langley in the amount of $490,000. While not a direct grant, $1.2 million in permissive tax exemptions were also approved by Council in 2019. The total value of grants that could be awarded to groups in 2019 is $2.2 million. The reason I say could be is that many of the incentive programs continue throughout the year. They're awarded as applicants come forward right until December. So we also undertook a community grants comparison to other communities. This is what we found. Abbotsford, with a population of 142,000, supports festivals and events, but more so from offsetting facility and field rental costs. They budget only $50,000 towards that effort. The city of Coquitlam has a Spirit of Coquitlam grant. They have a population of 139,000 approximately. They fund festivals, general projects, sports hosting, and capital improvements. They fund $379,000 in 2018. Kelowna, with a population of 127,000, funds cultural projects and events, operating grants to specific organizations, and an organization development grant, as well as art projects in the community. They fund $209,000, but that does not include their operating subsidies to their art center, museum, and art gallery. When that's added in, that comes up to just over $1 million. Township of Langley, with a population of approximately 170,000, supports community projects, festivals, capital improvements, sports hosting, heritage incentives, and neighborhood improvement projects. We funded in 2018 $409,149. That also includes the Gateway of Hope grant that was provided. Maple Ridge, with a population of 82,000, supports festivals, neighborhood improvements, public art, cultural facilities access. Their total comes to $120,000, and it does not include the operating subsidy to the ACT Art Center. I don't know what amount that would be. Langley City, 25,000 population, doesn't have any specific criteria or projects in mind. They funded $168,000 in 2018. We have 8 specific general eligibility criteria, one around proof of nonprofit status, accountability, financial disclosure, acknowledgement, membership, project eligibility, the community serve, and sustainability goals. Those have been developed over a long period of time. We also have grants category specific criteria. A capital improvement grant is a matching grant of up to $7,500 available to bona fide community halls and qualifying community museums. Nothing Without Effort community matching grant is a $5,000 grant, and it is for 7 communities. It's a long list of specific criteria which fosters beautification of your community, also volunteerism. The whole idea with Nothing Without Effort is to show that community groups are collaborating and that there is a good deal of volunteers that are part of that process. We also have the Major Festival Grant. For a 1-day festival, it's a maximum of $5,000. For a 2-day festival, it's a maximum of $10,000. Minor festivals, we provide up to $5,000 for organizations that meet all existing criteria, as well as 2 of the 3 additional criteria that are listed on the right. Recognized Service Club, having served TOL for more than 10 years with a proven track record of community service. Groups that have organized past community festivals, parades, or celebrations that have drawn audiences of 5,000 people or more, and that they have demonstrated sufficient capacity to organize the festival, meaning that they have volunteers, sponsors, an events marketing plan, and a past record of organizing events. So for Council's further consideration, again, I refer to the motion of April 1st, where Council decided that a review of grants criteria should take place and of process, and scheduled this meeting for today for a dialogue. A few groups came to Council during the past 2 years claiming difficulty in meeting grants criteria. On September 30th, 2019, Council approved the creation of a new grants criteria for ceremonial flybys. It was created without specific criteria stated, without a defined application process, and much vagueness in who the check should be written to. If moving forward on requests for funding outside of current grants criteria, Council could consider one of the following 3 options. 1, to relax or amend existing criteria in the general grants category, allowing more groups to qualify. 2, to continue funding such requests from Council contingencies on a case-by-case basis, serving the worthwhile needs of the special interest groups in the community and the causes and in and outside of the municipality. And to create 3, to create a separate new grant category that won't impact the many community groups who already qualify under the existing criteria and have established the criteria that has established ensured accountability, fairness, and an unbiased assessment of the requests that come forward. If Council establishes new criteria, Council should discuss and define specific criteria. An application process defines some additional parameters that will allow staff to make a fair assessment of the applications that are being received through the new funding category. Criteria and straightforward processes are fundamental to the community grant applicants and to staff who are required to make recommendations to Council on whether or not to fund something. Finally, staff are asking that Council receive this presentation for information. Happy to answer questions and be part of the discussion.
Okay. Well, we have a queue, a speaker's queue, and the first speaker, I believe, is Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Telemel. I really appreciate that. I mean, it gives you an idea, how do we get there? I was just looking and basically trying to understand, thank you very much. When you had you had a couple of charts there. First chart was 2.1 million or something like that. Another chart was 409,000 or something. Mm-hmm. What is one for? What is the other for? And how does that compare when you did a comparison with the other regional districts that you took in place? Not regional communities that you took in place. Yeah, 2.14, it's a 2019 awards review. And the other one was, it showed what the other communities were doing, surrounding communities.
Yes. And what is the question again? Sorry.
My question is, okay, what does 2.1 represent and what does the 409 represent?
So 2.1 is what has been committed to this year through the council and through the special initiative type of grants that we have out there.
Okay,
so it's a combination.
Okay, that I understand. What's the 409 represent?
The 409? Where's the 409? Sorry.
409-149-2 2018 Community Grants Comparison. That's page 1873.
So that represents $309,000 worth of commitments in 2018. So the one page refers to 2019. That was what was spent in 2018. So 309 for all the community grants, the 100 of which was for the Gateway of Hope.
Oh, it's 100 now?
Gateway of Hope is $100,000 per year.
Okay, did we start off at 50,000? Has it always been 100?
I don't believe so.
It was
based on casino bingo revenues per year. So it was an average. Usually it worked out to approximately $100,000 per year.
It's always been $100,000. The distinction, though, it was previously funded from our revenue from the bingo operations. Now that has been relocated to the city, we're funding it from general revenue, so it's no longer funded from an outside source.
My question is, I guess you don't know I wouldn't expect you to know the answer. If we're 2.1 budgeted this year, or is it budgeted this year or called for this year?
That's how much we anticipate will be spent this year, is about $2.2 million, inclusive of the commitments to the permissive tax exemptions.
So that's a $1.6 million difference, isn't it?
Permissive tax exemptions, I believe, was 1.2.
Okay, so my question is, you wouldn't know the answer. You wouldn't know what Kelowna, Coquitlam, Abbotsford, Maple Ridge, or Langley City have budgeted for this year. You wouldn't know that.
Total, no, because I don't know their permissive tax exemptions or what they've done in regards to that.
But as I say, I do appreciate it because it sure opens your eyes at how quickly this thing can expand. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay, and Mayor Froese.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. I know we've gone through this several times over the years and always trying to come to that sweet spot on what's the perfect grant criteria. But I really appreciate this report. You mentioned in your presentation that several organizations have delegated or contacted, they have difficulty meeting the criteria. Is there one particular thing, or is there several reasons that these don't meet the criteria? What would be the standout to you? Which ones?
Primarily, I think it's because grants are project or event specific, and a lot of organizations are coming forward for causes other than projects or events.
They're looking for operational.
They're looking
funding.
I would
Primarily.
believe so. That's correct.
No, I appreciate that. I think looking at what we're doing across the region, I think we're pretty generous, and I think this, it's working because we're not at $1 million. It's $400,000, which is still quite a lot compared to other regions, and I think what we have is working. But appreciate the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, thank you for your information. It's really helpful. I had a question with around maybe it was, I can't remember how long ago within the year, but we made some adjustments around community associations and some funding for that. Is that considered part of this community grants that we did?
So that is what council's revisiting right now, is to either establish community associations under a independent category and the level of funding, or to incorporate them under the existing category of community grants.
Okay, so that could be one of the one new grant category is a suggestion, or it could be a possibility, is that we could have community associations as a grant category.
Correct.
Are there other grant categories that we have, that you feel that council's talked about, that would be appropriate for us to think about and discuss?
I think the other one is listed on your motions or your agenda for today. There is one around, funding the Langley Seniors Resource Center that does not meet Community Hall criteria, which is that it be a hall in the township of Langley. And if you're to try and fund that on a permanent basis, that would be a new category for funding that you'd have to consider at this point.
Okay, so, all right, so that's helpful to know. I guess when I'm looking back as well on the page, you have the 2019 awards review, and it mentions on that page that we approved $146,000 in funding to 5 groups outside of criteria. So those two, you mentioned community associations, and now the seniors
Resource
Center, thank you.
And Langley Lodge is the third
And
one
Langley
for
Lodge.
$33,000 per year.
Okay, but that doesn't include these other 5 that we've approved last year for funding outside the criteria. Is that correct? Like on right after your historical perspective, there's a page called 2019 Awards Review. It's the same page that has that total at the bottom of 2.1 million. It says here we approved 146,000 in funding to 5 groups outside of the criteria. So should we be thinking of other categories that would now encompass these 5? I can't even remember what those 5 were, but
Yeah, it was the community associations, the Langley Lodge, I believe it was also the Gateway of Hope, and it was the Seniors Resource Center. There must be one more.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so really there's 3 that we could consider here that are not currently part of the community awards process.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kunst.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you explain the grant to Tourism Langley for $490,000? It's administered, but what is that?
That is the collection that the province takes from hoteliers, the taxes and that. We are just the administrators of that. They collect the revenue, they then give it to the township, but on our financial statements, it appears as a grant to Langley Tourism.
Right, so we don't actually, do we send any money to Tourism Langley? Is there anything in the budget for
We
Tourism
just
Langley?
take what is given to us by the province. It's an in and out,
Okay.
I believe.
All right, thank you.
And Councillor Woodward.
Just want to clarify that last one. Isn't there a fee for service that we still contract with Tourism Langley?
I'd have
I
to,
think there is. I think maybe that's what Councillor Coons is referring to. I believe there is a fee for service component that we actually pay from general revenue. Is that correct?
That's correct. As I recall, it was around $50,000.
Yeah, that's what I recall as well. And I think that is something to revisit. I believe that's for some of the mobile areas they set up at Willowbrook Mall and hand out brochures and a few other things like that to promote the community. Maybe looking at phasing that out over some period of time as a mechanism that's probably not as worth much as it was back in the day.
Yeah.
To try to save some money back. So just leave that out there for now. That's actually what that was for. The other thing that I had a question, though, is in regards to the Gateway of Hope. I can certainly, identify and sympathize with no interest in really looking at somehow being perceived as pulling funding from the Gateway of Hope, but it's certainly a bit raw and a bit irritating to me that we have a gaming funding source for that. That's transferred to another municipality, and that we're still committing to that funding. So I'd like to float that out there, that it's simply, again, here we go again with the City of Langley, and it's simply not fair. And with that money coming back and maybe phasing out Tourism Langley over time, that would free up a fair amount of funding to divert to our local community, not somebody else's. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I just want to, a few things. I remember, the Tourism Langley, I mean, that's an opportunity as well that perhaps we could maybe, obviously we won't be able to do it today, but sit down with them and see, what they can do to help groups and organizations where we cannot. That's one thing. And also, as Councillor Woodward has mentioned, the fee, because, that's a big number as you come up with 2.1 million. That's a big number. And I thought that the casino, or it was a bingo palace or something we had, was averaging between 50 and 125 depending on the year. I think they had some poor years, but anyway, regardless of that. And now that that's changed, and I knew that they had come to council last term and they'd expressed, the changes in the locations and then there would no longer be gaming funding coming out of the TOL. Yeah, that's certainly something we can look at. Maybe we'd look at for the less. I don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, but look at, because every dollar counts, especially when we look at fairness. We've already been told by other sources that there's zero impact that the township gives in subsidies to the city, which seems to be interesting, but that's what we keep being told. It reminds me of the Emperor's New Clothes. But those are other things. And the last thing is there a chance that when people are filling out and they're having difficulty, whether there's a speeded track or another way, or a designated staff member that can help people go through the system, all the criteria? And does that help as far as that question goes? Am I through the chair?
So this year we're onboarding a new application process through SurveyMonkey. ID department has been working with my staff in developing that. We plan on offering workshops to community groups to go through the process so that they're aware of sort of like a question and answer and demonstrate how to apply for community grants. That's planned for this year.
Okay, next question quickly, and maybe the staff might have to answer it, not necessarily you. What percentage of our budget would this be as far as the grants and other services? What percentage of our tax increase or
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Anybody know what that would be as far as tax increase?
If all of the revenues, and this is not the case as we referenced with Tourism Langley, were coming from general revenue, it would be around 2%.
Percent tax.
In terms of the implications.
Thank you.
Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Peter. Oh, sorry, Mr. Tulamello, for putting this together. It's very interesting to look, and having been on a prior term, to look at the whole history and context of how we've come to this place. And I would characterize it as a real evolution of what's happened with our granting program. I had a similar question to Councillor Ferguson, actually, what percentage of the budget overall would these costs be? But I think that's complicated by the fact that we have lumped in a number of these together, and to me it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges, that the community grant program is not separated out just as one component with these other numbers here. And so to me it makes it a bit more challenging to compare ourselves to other communities that way because of those differences. They're just the pooling.
Yes, so if you're talking about community grants only, in terms of the different categories that we have, we budget $430,000 annually to those categories. We don't always spend up to those amounts that we have in the budget. So as you saw for 2019, although we had $430,000 in the budget, we only spent $309,000.
Okay, so to follow up from that question then, is there a mechanism through which we incrementally add to that amount? Or has that been sort of stagnant or static for some time, that benchmark of 130?
We go back to 2010 when there was much more demand than what the funds were in the budget. And basically that's why Council had the discussion back in 2010 around grants was the demand was greater than the dollars that we had. And at Council's direction, we started enforcing criteria, where prior to that, we were a little lax in enforcing those criteria. So we cracked down on criteria to make sure that those groups that actually qualified were the ones receiving.
Okay. I guess my other thought, and I've considered this for quite some time since we've been part of trying to tweak the whole system, is to not make it too onerous, but at the same time is to be good stewards of our funds so that we make sure that the criteria and the values that we want to promote are being maintained. And I also really appreciate the fact that I think it was a great advance to have the form online so that people could fill it out, and especially the fact that you cannot continue with the form to fill it out without filling in certain areas, which meant that many people could have handed it in and thought that they were potentially done, only to find out that there was vital information that was missing, and so it required them actually to do that, so it didn't take up more staff time. My only other question, I guess, is just the way that this has grown. Has the township ever considered, do you know, public engagement on grants? Because generally what we've heard is piecemeal delegations coming and saying, well, we don't fit the criteria, could you consider making a different criteria? But, the value of sort of looking at it more comprehensively to say we should perhaps have a more defined rationales. Maybe we need different rationales for what's currently being desired in the community and just sort of formalize it that way.
To my knowledge, there has been no community consultation with respect to community grants that I saw in anywhere in the past history.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a great report.
I just wanted to go back to the numbers here, the one slide. So the $235,250 for the 67 communities groups, those are the ones that are meeting the criteria.
That's correct.
Now the $146,000 to 5 groups that outside of the criteria, what were those 5 groups?
Again, I believe it was Gateway of Hope, the Langley Lodge, it was the community associations, and it was, oh God, I'm lost. Oh, and the Seniors Resource Society.
Okay, so Seniors Resource, but that was 7,500. The community associations, that was 1,000 for 3 groups. So
it was 1,500.
1,500
yes.
for the 3 groups?
No, it was 1,000 per group.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was about $3,000, yes.
$3,000. So that's $10,000 between the seniors and the community association. Gateway is $100,000.
Gateway is
So what did we give
$100,000.
Langley Lodge?
$33,000.
33,000.
Yes.
And I'm just curious as to why we would do that, because it's a health facility. Anyway, the other ones, the 103,000 through special incentive and initiative programs. Can you give me examples of those, like sports hosting, heritage, neighborhoods?
So for sports hosting, we have we're sponsoring provincial and national based tournaments as well as local tournaments that draw people into the community. That amounts to $43,400 a year, bringing in those groups because there's that economic benefit to the community. With regard to the neighborhood incentive program, that's primarily PAC groups coming forward or neighborhoods coming forward and saying, look, we would like a new playground in our community. We would come up with 50% of the funding or more. In most cases, it's more. And we provide matching dollars for those contributions up to, I think it's $5,000 or $5,000 per group, and that's $30,000. Heritage Incentive Program is through the Heritage Advisory Committee, and they have a budget of $20,000. And the Gender Equity Program is a specialized grant, and we provide $20,000.
Okay. So it seems to me that one of the questions we need to wrestle with today, and in looking at these numbers as well too, on the one slide you had that we spent $409,000 in 2018, and yet the slide, oh, I see, and it's gone up to $484,258 in 2019.
That's correct.
So, question number one, do we want to spend that kind of money on grants?
I can't answer that.
Yeah, well, I think council needs to talk about that, for sure.
Yes.
The second question that I have is, there was some provision put forward, I'm sure it was a Councillor Fox, former Councillor Fox motion, with regards to groups having to put the township's logo on any material that they put out, and that's led to some confusion because the community thinks that it's the township that's running the event, and we're not. We're just a sponsor for it. So do we need clarification on that? The third thing is that we're getting more of these odd requests coming in for money. We had one a couple of meetings back, which they didn't feel $2,500 was enough. They wanted to get more money. So I'm thinking that we need to, as you've suggested, look at different new categories. But I think it all has to come back, and we need to look at $484,000. That's a lot of money to spend on these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Froese wants to speak. I'll put him on next.
Thank you. So some of these other categories like tourism and Langley Lodge and Gateway of Hope, those are council decisions and they're discussed by council. So I think if we want to discuss whether or not to pay for them, that comes up at the time that they come for renewal. Today you're looking for more policy direction, and is what I understand. So if you can go to that slide that has your kind of next steps or your requests on. So, what I see is that it's I don't think we can be shy and say that we're not doing a good job for our community when it comes to community grants. We're very, compared to our neighbors, we're right up there. We're very accommodating, and I hear the discussion that maybe it's too much and we should look at it. But I think that's the direction that council has to give you. Having a budget on the amount of grants that we put out, and then fitting those applications as long as they meet the criteria. Either, I guess there's different ways of doing it. First come, first serve. Once it's full, once the uptake is done, there's no more money, or we allocate a percentage based on available funding to those groups. so right now, I think if council wants to see some new categories, that's going to increase this amount. If we want to cut back some other categories in favor of new categories, then that's one way of keeping it. But it's council that needs to decide how much is enough, I think. So going forward, at this point, I think is a good job here. I think when we look at these other bigger grants, council can make a decision whether to carry on with them or not. And some of them have historical reasons. The Gateway of Hope was $1 million over 10 years, which we didn't quite finish. It was supposed to come out of gaming money, and the gaming money ceased, so council made a decision to carry on. Tourism Langley, I'm not sure what's in the agreement that we have with them, where that $50,000 came from, but that could always be reviewed. So at this point, I'm not sure what, I'll leave it up to the chair if we're just going to receive this, but we need to have, I think staff needs some direction from us if we're going to add any more categories. At this point, I think for me, it's working well, and I agree that we shouldn't be funding operational expenses. It should go to the community for community events and for items that assist the community. And so each one of these categories has been a council motion at one point or another to include, like scholarships, dry grads, all came from a council initiative. So if council wants to go further, then we need to give you some direction. But at this point, I think receiving this presentation is good, unless you see that you need some more direction. I think we have a pretty good program here on issuing out our grants. So I'll leave it up to the chair.
All right. Can you go back to the slide where you've done the community grants comparison? There. If we run down those numbers on the far side, Abbotsford is spending 35 cents per capita. Coquitlam's spending $2.72 per capita. Kelowna is spending $1.64 per capita. The township of Langley is spending $3.50 per capita. Maple Ridge is spending $1.50 per capita. And Langley City is spending $6.51 per capita. So I think the $3.50 per capita is more than generous, as Mayor Froese has said. And I'm wondering if part of the direction we can send you back with is staying at that cap of $3.50 a head. And so part of what we'd have to get is some sort of a system where when the money's first come, first serve, and when it's gone, it's gone. Because we don't do that now, do we?
So the process is that applicants all have a deadline to submit their grants, but we have the ability that if there is more than what is in the pool, we have the ability to prorate based on the number of communities served. So we do have that ability, and we have made such adjustments from the staff perspective to council in our recommendations that if this group's only serving 300 people, we would not be awarding the full $2,500 for the grant.
Oh,
so we do have mechanisms.
So we could reduce it from 25 down to 15 or whatever to get more.
But going to first come, first serve would make it a competition, and I don't know that council would like that.
Okay. So we can go with the cap, and then you can go with the prorating to stay within the cap, if we wanted to do it. Okay. I've got some more speakers here. Councillor Kunst.
Could we consider something? I sit on a foundation where people do apply for grants, and how we do it is they apply. We would say offer them, the money that they're asking for, but we would divide it up over 3 years. So say the first year they get $15,000, the second year you get maybe 2/3 of that, and then the third year you get 1/3 of that. And by the end of it, you should be up and running, and this initiative, whatever it might be. Now they've had an opportunity to find grants and whether it's membership dues or somehow to support their initiative. Now, I don't know where that would fit in we look at community festivals, capital, sports hosting, where that would maybe fit, but maybe there is a category where, we've got new groups coming in saying, look, we'll fund this, project for the first year. Second year, you could apply for maybe half of that money, and then by the third year, maybe a quarter, something along those lines, where so we can maybe phase out some of the people who are, needing those huge dollars to keep on going. But anyway, it's just a suggestion.
Councillor Whitmarsh.
I'm just wondering, as I look at the slide, I think it's the last slide, it says council's further considerations, and does mention if council establishes new grant categories, we should discuss the criteria and so on. It makes sense to me that that we as a council should look at what these grant categories are, and I think some of them were mentioned, community associations, Langley Resource Center. I think, the Gateway of Hope seems a little bit different to me, because we as a council decided to continue for a 5-year period at the $100,000 for 5 years, and then reassess at the end of that 5-year period as our contribution to homelessness in the Langley area. So that's a little bit maybe unique, but I'm wondering, as a council, we should identify what these new grant categories are, at least the ones that we funded this last year that are new outside of the current criteria, and maybe, as a council, discuss those particular ones and decide if we're going to continue or not. Because some of them were, that we did fund this year that are outside the criteria. I don't know if we made a decision on whether those are just this year, or are they going to follow in the next year or not. And I think that's something that we as a council, we need to decide. So clarity on what those categories are, and then a discussion of council as to whether those categories continue or not, would be helpful, so that we don't, maybe they don't come here every year for discussion. We can actually make a policy around those categories. So that's sort of where I'm sitting right now.
Okay. Councillor Woodward.
No, I think some of the previous comments have covered it. Thanks.
All right.
Madam Chair, if I could just make a quick comment, a couple quick comments. I think we have to verify the Langley City contribution. I have a recollection that may include the amount they provide to sports groups, such as minor hockey, for example. So that would have to be something we'd have to look into a bit more, because that number seems a bit disjointed from their traditional approach. So we'll take that one back. More importantly, though, I think what Peter was saying is there's I guess 3 different things on the table. The first one is there's some existing exceptions that exist. We could choose to make those into special categories, or we could leave them as exceptions, recognizing they're one-offs, and in that way not be encouraging further, I guess, one-offs. Each one would be looked upon on its own merit, as opposed to in any sort of special policy. There is, however, the need to assess if we are going to expand. Our preference would be to look at it as being on a policy basis. So it would be, I guess, first of all, worthy of determining if we want to have additional categories, as was referenced, and then if we want to fund those categories. So one option is to leave it as the status quo. The next option is to actually create additional categories. And then the third option is to, if we do create additional categories, do we wish to add additional funding, or do we wish to actually reallocate the existing funding within those categories?
Yeah, okay, so let's go through the additional, so these existing exceptions. What are the existing exceptions? The community associations?
The community associations, the Langley Seniors Resource Center under capital improvement grants, which would then open up, if you were to expand it to all capital improvement projects that come forward, you would have to change it from being bona fide community halls. The other 2 being Gateway of Hope was a special circumstance with regard to the funding that ceased to exist, and Langley Lodge, which is a commitment of $33,000. I believe it's for a period of 5 years as well, but that began about 2 years ago. So it would be those 4 in particular.
Okay. And why did we give Langley Lodge money again?
Madam Chair, the reason was an impassioned plea by the president of Langley Lodge, Mr. Metcalf, who came forth and explained that while Langley Lodge was resident in the city, a great number of its residents were from the township. I think it was like, again, 75%. And it was on that basis that it was decided that the additional funds could be justified because of their ability to have criteria, that there was some extracurricular activities that was then thought that could be limited to Township Act residents or former Township residents, but was then simply allowed to go through all of the residents of the Langley Lodge.
And just to add that it was for programs for residents of that community.
Okay, so we've got basically 4 outliers here: the community associations, the Langley Seniors Resource Center, the Gateway of Hope, and Langley Lodge.
Correct.
That's it.
And now you also have the flyby.
And the flyby. Okay. So if I could put you on the spot, what is your recommendation that we do? Do you think we should do additional categories, or do we just leave them as one-off fundings? Or is this going to be...
I think for the sake of fairness to other community groups, you should establish the 4 of the major ones as one-offs, and maybe the community association as a new category.
Okay. So now the one-offs, if we leave those as one-offs, is the funding, because we've already given the funding out, it's already included in that $484,000.
That's correct.
Yeah. So we would continue on giving them that money?
Well, you've made commitments to the 2 bigger ones, Gateway of Hope, to the Langley Lodge. You have made commitments over a period of years. With regard to the Seniors Resource Center, things that didn't meet criteria is that we don't normally fund signage for a building or parking lot improvements, and those are the things that that group came to council with. And the flyby, it seems like the motion is that it be established. It's already a motion of council to establish it as a funding category.
Yeah. So that would be a separate category, and the community associations would be a separate category.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So, council, what's your feeling on this? Leave the Seniors Resource Center, although I don't understand why we couldn't say capital. They could apply for the capital grants even if they're not a bona fide community hall in the township. We're making an exception.
I can't participate to vote on senior center.
Okay.
The other stuff, like that's item B1, I can participate on, but not B2.
Okay. Well, but
If you need separation, that's fine.
yeah, and we'll separate it when we vote on it. But I'm just wanting to know why we couldn't include them under the community halls and just relax the bona fide community hall label for
So
it.
if you were to change the criteria,
Yeah.
and this is what happened in 2010, that there were many groups that were stepping forward with facilities in the township and other places that were coming forward wanting to have funds for capital improvements. So by doing that, you would be opening the door to other groups that say, well, you know, the Lions Hall should be part of the community hall criteria. There would be other groups in the community that might have facilities that would be coming forward for that capital improvement program.
All right. So we'd have to have a separate category just for the Langley Senior Center then.
Unless, as I said, unless you want to open it up to to be fair to other community groups to come forward making capital improvement requests.
Okay. So they would be their own separate category. And if they're their own separate category, no other groups can come forward under that category.
I would think that it would be one that should be considered on a one-off basis through capital contingency through council contingency rather than create a separate category.
Except that every year we'll be giving it out of council contingency. It's going to be an ongoing request
Okay.
from them, is
Yes.
would be my guess, because it was clearly a political message that came out in the last election that the majority of the participants in that senior center are from the township, and they want their tax dollars to go there. Okay. All right. Let's see if we got anybody on the speakers list. Yes. Okay. So Mayor Froese first.
All right, maybe we can get some motions and we can see what council thinks. Number one, I would move that we receive this report. Number two, I would move that, before I get to there, the community associations. Now, I really have difficulty with this because today it could be 5 community associations, tomorrow there could be 50. So whoever decides to have a community association. So what criteria do we have to determine that the community association is, if it has, I mean, they're all great people, but I really have a difficulty with them. And I think we do have a community grant program. And so I would just move that we receive this report. That'd be my motion. And I think what we have here is fine. You've got one-ofs. We already have a system in place for those that come for one-ofs. And that way council can decide if they feel it's appropriate or not at the time. Community associations, today there's 5, tomorrow there's 10. What's the criteria? They're loose. Loose, they can be loose organizations and just pop up at certain times of the year. So I would just move that we receive this for information.
Okay. Is there a seconder to the motion to receive? Councillor Kuntz. Any discussion on the motion to receive? Oh, okay. No, I don't have to. I'll do it by hand. Okay. Yeah. Any discussion? Okay. There's nobody wanting to speak to it? Okay. Just to receive. Receive the report. So all in favor of receiving the report? Okay, it's done. It's received. Okay, step 2. Another motion. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Well, I'm not sure. I think I like some of the thinking around some of them being one-offs. We made a commitment on some of them for 5 years, so it's sort of a 5-year one-off, and we'll discuss it when that term ends. And comes up for renewal, and we'll have a discussion as council at that time. For me, community associations I do actually think it's important. We did put in some criteria of ensuring that there isn't a rampant number of community associations forming. We do have distinct communities here in Langley. We talked about having one community association that has gone through all of the paperwork with the province to become a nonprofit association. There's a lot of work that goes into that, so I don't think they can pop up just easily. It's a lot of work and effort to get there. And I think they add a lot to our community, and we're not talking significant dollars. So we're talking right now, the most we would have is probably 6, 1 for each. We also had criteria of how they spend their money and what they use it for. So we can refine that criteria, but we did have criteria. I don't have it in front of me here today, but we could refine that. We're talking maybe a total of $5,000 or $6,000 spread out between all of the community associations that could happen. And so I'd like to see a separate category continue with, maybe we need to identify that criterion and fine-tune it, but we did have it when it was set up the first time. I'd like to see us continue with that. And, the $1,000 seems, at this point, seems appropriate. So I'd make a motion to make that as a separate category.
Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Arneson seconds. Discussion on the motion. Okay, the only thing that I would put in about that motion is... Oh, who wanted? Councillor Arneson? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I haven't said much about this in particular. I appreciate the fact that the motion has come forward because I know there has been a lot of discussion in the past back and forth about the degree to which we need information, we rely on information, but how that information comes to us. And I think that the community groups, from my perspective, have a track record of looking at trying to shape and tailor their activities towards now getting the funding, because what they recognize is that we have expectations. So I don't think anybody thinks these days that they're just going to get a blank check and they can do what they want. I do personally feel it's a nominal amount of money, and it's also an opportunity. Some of us get information from different ways, but if we're encouraging our community groups to have events, to me it means that that's a way for me to participate, just to go there as not really a spectator, but, I'm not participating in the event per se, but I'm gleaning information, taking the temperature of the community, those kinds of things. So I really think it's quite invaluable to the township, and we don't have that kind of group in our advisory groups, really. We used to have one, as we know, and that was collapsed. And so I think it's important. And if it requires new category and new criteria, or just fine-tuning what we used before to allow them to be funded, I think that that would be a positive thing for the community. My 2 cents.
Your 2 cents, okay. Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, yeah. Can I get you to quickly reread the motion again, or if it might
That
be self-explanatory?
Community associations be established as a separate category.
Okay, simple. There was no background or supplemental other than we'll look at that when the time comes. We're not really making a decision on the money part of it yet. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mayor Froese.
Thank you. No, I'm not going to support it the way it's written. If it was to get a report back on what the criteria is, that would be one thing. I don't know what the criteria is on this, and I think it strikes to me that we're giving the money for operational, and I haven't seen any difference, because we do have a community grant process if they want to put on an event. Anybody can put on an event if they meet the criteria. So I'm not going to support this in its present form without further background. Thank you.
Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, kind of echoing that as well. I think that nobody's going to argue that community associations don't have value in the community, but I've never really understood why $1,000 really matters that much to a community association. If you have membership and you have standing in the community and you have a significant number of people participating in whatever your association is doing, never understood why they need Township of Langley funding. Maybe they need Township of Langley funding because they don't have very many members. And so for me, that's sort of where I go with it. And, I think that we have a small number of these community associations, and I don't know if this would motivate the creation of more. But I've never understood why we're expected to fund a nonprofit for the sake of, not necessarily pursuing specific community events, not necessarily doing much other than meeting the odd night over once a month. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, I think when this was established the first time, and we did it, on that occasion, there was a number of criteria that were laid out for what they could spend their money on. There was criteria on how many they could have. There was some discussion there around them being apolitical. There was a number of things that were in place, and we may not like that criteria today. We may have different criteria. And I don't think the motion is intended to say that there would be a category without criteria. So I'm happy to, if we want to amend the motion, that would ask for a separate category and ask staff to bring back the criteria or the suggested criteria for this separate category for council to be able to discuss. My intention was that there would be criteria brought back for us to discuss and work through. It wasn't intended that we would have no criteria.
Okay, so that's an amendment to your motion. Is there a seconder to the amendment? Councillor Kunst, okay. To bring back, and ask staff to bring back criteria. Now, Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, those criteria are interesting. I don't remember the specific criteria list. Just tweak me a little bit there. The mover could potentially mention or one community association in the township that's not political. I'd like you to name one. So I think for me that, we are potentially getting down the road where we are funding political organizations, and I think that's something that we should not pretend that we're not doing that. Thanks.
Okay, any other discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair, just before you do call the question, it'd be helpful to have a discussion on the criteria that is being envisioned around this referral. The challenge staff have with the program as it is, that the criteria by category are many and broad. So if there's something that one is looking for, such as non-political, that helps, I suppose. But we do have these other programs that apply for events or for, capital items. So if there's some sort of program policy that we're looking at that help Mr. Tulamello try to put that together, again, it would be something that would be of much importance. Mr. Tulamello?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment, and I do appreciate Councillor Woodward's point about, why do community associations, for example, require $1,000? What difference does it make? My experience with community organization is they often rely on co-funding from other partners, and very often that's looked at. If the Township of Langley or another local government is supporting them, it gives a certain amount of veracity, I guess, to their activities, which then influences their ability to generate more funds. Because, for example, you can say, well, I'm having an event and it's co-sponsored by the Township of Langley, as opposed to just, well, we're having an event. And I've had recent experience where, as a result of that, probably, well, that's a bit, speculative on my part, but resulted in another 4 financial partners coming on board simply because the Township of Langley was a participant in that. That's my belief. So I do think it's important. It's not the be-all and the end-all, but it's pivotal in terms of getting more funding, I think, from some other organizations.
Okay. Councillor Whitmarsh, I wonder, you seem to have the best recollection of what the criteria were when we discussed it originally. Maybe you could just run down the list.
I'm simply going from memory, and that's why it's difficult, because I can't remember all the criteria that we had established at the time, but we did have some things listed. For example, I think, community associations, they obviously are interested in their particular community, and whether that be Brookswood or Fort Langley or Walnut Grove or Aldergrove or Willoughby, they're interested in their community and seeing their community have the best for their community. And one of the things that we talked about was, rather than operating dollars, for example, things like doing surveys of people in their community to help us to have understanding of what's happening in their community and what we could do to make their community better. There's a lot of good information, and I think the goal was to steer them, and when I use the word apolitical, was to steer them away from particular councillors or during elections deciding that they're going to endorse people, those sorts of things. And there was some statements around that those kind of things would result in them losing their funding. So it really was meant to be benefiting their community. What's the best for Walnut Grove? What's the best for Aldergrove? And them really are people who are passionate about their community and want to give input. We don't have that sort of thing right now. We don't have that thing through our advisory groups. Our advisory groups have varying degrees of effectiveness, and I think the community associations could be some of our most effective ways of gathering information from our members, from our community, and finding out what's best. And so we did have things around what they could spend the money on. It wasn't for operating, but it could be for something like a survey or other kinds of things that they would do to benefit their community. There was some discussion around the amount, and we, I think, settled on $1,000 that they would use. They had to still be a nonprofit, regulated body. They're not just someone that you can't just set it up, and you can't have, the Whitmarsh Community Group. You have to be registered with the province as a nonprofit association, and you have to be registered. And we talked about having one group per area, one in Fort Langley, one in Walnut Grove, and they're the official group that receives that funding. So we did have some criteria. I don't have them in front of me here, but we did have those laid out. I'm not sure why we can't just have staff bring that criteria that initially had, and then let us open it up for discussion.
Do you recall when the meeting was that we had this discussion, roughly? Was it last spring?
I'm trying to think. It's about a year ago.
It was in the fall?
It was in the fall.
Was it under the old council or this council?
Well, that's what I can't remember if it was. It was last council, so it wouldn't have been the fall. It would have been, well, I guess it was just before the election.
I think it was around April 1st. And Mr. Tillamello, I think you're trying to process that. Can you perhaps recall any of the criteria that were applied? Because
There was just a basic discussion. There were no established criteria that were stated other than that discussion of what it should be: apolitical, representative of the community, and really I'm looking for direction as how do you identify which group is the voice of a specific community. My concerns at the time were that every neighborhood can come up with an association that says they represent the voice of a specific community.
So let's say they have to have a minimum 25 members.
And okay, so that would be, but going back to those meetings, council had a dialogue around that, but there was no no mention of what criteria should be established. So I don't even know that the minutes would reflect that. It would have been just a general discussion at that time. So it would be your recollection of what that was that would help guide staff in determining what was said.
So that's fair. I think that, I mean, this doesn't seem that difficult to me. I know maybe it's a lot more difficult than I think, but it feels to me that the community associations provide significant benefit to our community, and it doesn't seem that difficult to find a way to fund them for $1,000. It doesn't seem that difficult to me to come up with criteria that would limit the number of community associations. I think you can have the official community association for that particular area, and we have some that are already established. Right now we have 6 unique areas. They each have, well, no, they don't all have one, but some of them have one. They don't have 2, 3, and 4, and 5 already, so they have one. They can be the official group. They are the group that's gone through and done the paperwork, that has the membership, that is doing the surveys, that is coming and delegating to council already. I'm not sure that this is that difficult. I think we can create lots of reasons why it might not work, but really, we're not talking a lot of money, and we're just trying to get good public feedback. So I think as a council, it doesn't seem that difficult. I could probably create a list of criteria, bring it to council, and we could then have a good, wholesome discussion around that criteria if we want. I can start it off if you want. I don't have it here today, but I don't think it's that difficult.
Well, maybe if you could touch base, we'll deal with the motion where we're sending it to staff, but maybe you could inform staff's deliberations afterwards.
I'm happy to do that, and then of course it's always going to come to council for discussion and debate, and council obviously has the opportunity to turn it down at any time they want.
Yeah, and I recall part of the discussion too being around them being able to do community events like hot dog street, like close the street for the day and do a hot dog party or something. So I've got a list here saying for use in surveys, community feedback, community events, apolitical, staying away from any kind of political endorsements in elections, not to be used for operating funds. They must be a registered not-for-profit society. There's only one group per area that will be acknowledged by council, and the group has to have a minimum of 25 members. That's what I've come up with in today's discussions. Anything else that you want to add to that? Councillor or Mayor Froese, sorry.
Thank you. Good. It's been a good discussion, although I'm still not going to support this. I think it's a slippery slope. I agree there's great people on great community associations that do great work, but and if they want to have a day to sell hot dogs and have a community event, we have a process for that. They obviously, if they're a nonprofit society, they meet the criteria, I think. I'm not sure. But they can apply and have that event. If they want to do a survey, I don't know if that fits under a community grant. Does a survey fit under community grant, community survey? Or
it would be a consideration that could be taken to say that is project specific.
So I believe we do have a process in place, and I think what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for a political decision. This is a political decision, no matter what you say. If 2 great groups, I see a gentleman in the audience here come up from Fort Langley and say that they all represent the Fort Langley community, are both nonprofits, both develop a good track record, all fantastic people. They're going to come to Mr. Tullamello, and he's going to have to make a decision. He'll say, well, I can't do that. I'm going to take it to council. So now we're going to decide which one is going to represent that community, and that is a political decision. I think we have a program that is already in place that supports those groups that want to have community events, want to have festivals, want to fix their leaky roof on their community hall. Very thorough, and I've, in my experience, in my other career, there are community groups that form that all say they support the community, and they're all great people. I think we should stick with what we already do. That we have a program where they can come and get money for a specific event. That exists, so I'm not going to support this. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I think the minute you start listing criteria too, like Councillor Richter, the chair here, is attempting to do is good faith effort, but then the more criteria you list, the more reasons you have to start questioning. For example, doesn't concern me that a group might endorse candidates, so I don't want to make funding conditional on them endorsing whoever they want to endorse. I also agree with Mayor Froese that, I don't know how we decide which groups get to be the official voices of a community. So if 10,000 people live in Walnut Grove and they have 25 members, now they speak for Walnut Grove? I mean, I don't see how that works either, in terms of Councillor Whitmarsh's desire to anoint these people spokespeoples for the community. I don't see what the criteria would be for us to determine who's worthy of our funding as representatives of large areas of the township and who isn't. So I don't want to be put in that position. I don't want to put you in that position. And again, if we're talking certain one-offs like surveys, are they even qualified to run a survey? So for me, and if the survey, and there's $1,000 or $500 to do a survey, and they have 100 members and they can't fund that themselves, then it doesn't mean much to them. And again, I think for us to start heading down this path of funding community associations is one that I believe does lead to a quagmire, as Mayor Froese has outlined. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kunst.
Currently, how does a community group get funding, and how, under which category would they apply?
So it would be community grants general. And again, the main 8 criteria that were listed on the one page with respect to membership, accountability, etc. So I believe we have a 250 minimum,
right?
Somewhere in those criteria. So I mean, it would be based on that objective.
So if a community group wanted to, they could still apply. Is that right? Like if somebody wanted to apply as a community group, they could still do that?
Yes, the Langley Meadows Community Association applies and has received funding for the last 5 years.
Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to call the question. So the amendment, the motion is to establish community associations as a separate category, and the amendment part to that is and ask staff to bring back criteria. So we'll vote first on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? Show of hands, yeah. Okay. All opposed?
You didn't vote.
I didn't vote. I'm in favor. So what does that mean? We've got 3-3?
Oh, a point of order on that.
2, 4, 6, 7. Who was opposed?
Can I vote after I see everybody else's vote too?
Okay. Okay. People who are opposed, raise your hands. Okay. So the motion carries with Councillor Ferguson, Mayor Froese, and Councillor Woodward opposed. So on the main motion now, as amended, community associations are a separate category, and ask staff to bring back criteria. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Motion carries with Councillor Ferguson, Mayor Froese, and Councillor Woodward opposed. Okay, our next thing that we have to talk about is do we add the flyby as a separate category, or do we want to just leave it as a one-off? Is there a motion to add the flyby? Okay, Councillor, no. All right, nobody wants, and then the Langley Seniors Resource Center. Steve, you have to declare a conflict. Is there a motion to include the Langley Seniors Resource Center as a separate category? A separate funding category. Okay, Councillor Arneson moves.
I'll second.
Second by Councillor Kunst. Yes, you sure can.
Thank you. I just want to comment, just because it's specifically in the staff report pertaining to the money that we gave them. I think it's clear from our understanding of the feedback we've received that 70% of our community members, likely, because they do keep statistics, actually live in the township of Langley, and we don't have any similar service we have other senior community areas and venues, but nothing that's substantial or comprehensive similar to that. So what I'm wondering is if we could create that category for them specifically, but add very specific language around that, because what I perceive to be the biggest problem is the fact that it doesn't exist in our jurisdiction. So it's outside the township of Langley, but it is serving township residents. So if we could craft some language that would address that, and I think that would make it more fair in the sense of other groups or centers that may wish to also avail themselves of funding, so that there's already a precedent set as to why it is we are separating them out that way.
Councillor? Okay. So you're amending it?
Yes.
Okay. And so what's the amendment then?
Okay. We would amend for the Langley Senior Resources Center to create a category under community grant policy with respect to community halls, to include it as a TOL serving community hall outside of the township, comma, and requiring specific language and criteria in order to meet our goals.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, I think what we're trying to do is to deem the Langley Senior Resources Center to be a Langley Township Community Hall, and that it would be processed accordingly.
Yeah, but that's contrary to the motion. The motion is to set it up as a separate category.
Okay.
So your proposed amendment would be...
That's what this motion actually is, to include it as a list of one of our halls.
Oh, that's the motion that we moved? I thought it was to do a... Okay. Okay, so I will clarify with the mover and the seconder, which was Councillor Arneson and Councillor Kuntz. The motion that you moved, the original motion, was it the one that's on the agenda? Is that the one that you moved?
Okay, let me just look. The list of community hall facilities eligible to apply, yes.
Yes. And is that the one you thought you... Okay, so I was mistaken. I thought it was a different motion. All right, and so Councillor Arneson wants to amend this by including it...
Okay, we may want to wordsmith this, but my intention is to create language that suggests the rationale as to why it is being considered as a special standalone category when otherwise it wouldn't qualify.
Well, it's specifically around the fact that council did not approve signage at another community hall and approved signage at this one as being a acceptable capital expense.
Okay, I'm just trying to create a sense of explicitly why we would in perpetuity consider them in a standalone category that way when they otherwise don't comply with the rest of our policy.
So perhaps, though, if I go back one step, perhaps, though, it's simply a matter that it complies with all elements of our policy but for its location.
That would work.
Okay, so that's the amendment that you want to put on now?
Sure.
Okay. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Can you tell us that amendment again, Mr. Backett?
By way of background, it was simply that this facility was to meeting all criteria that would be required of a community hall, but for its location, meaning that if this was in the township, it would meet all criteria. In this circumstance, it meets all criteria, but for the fact it's in the township.
Okay, so Mayor Froese seconds. All right, any discussion? Okay, Councillor Kunst.
How, if we're giving a grant to the Langley Lodge for activities, could we not then make that the criteria that, because I'm sure that the Langley Resource Center, a lot of their funding is for activities for the seniors who are, I don't know I support the amendment, but that was my question originally before.
Sorry, but this is in respect to the capital improvement grant only. It's not with respect to other aspects of the community grants general.
Okay. So then, I would support the amendment, the one that Mr. Backen outlined.
Okay. Councillor Woodward.
I don't remember this whereas here, whereas 75% of the people served by the Langley Seniors Resource Center are township residents. Do we know if that's factual?
I don't have verification.
Do you know where that came from?
They provided that in their presentation to council when they requested funding, yes.
Okay, so it came from them?
Yes, it did.
Applying to the township for money?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other speakers, I will call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Show of hands. Okay, anybody opposed? Amendment carries, so let's go to the main motion. All those in favor of the main motion? Oh, you got one question? Okay.
Thanks.
Mayor Froese.
There's a good point brought up with the 70%. So basically, on our other, community halls are in a township, so we fund them because they're in a township. Will we add that a majority, I don't think it has to be 70%, but a majority, we have another criteria for other grants, a majority are township residents. Would that be in this implicitly, or is it just going to be, they're going to be one of the community halls?
The marker is 50% plus one.
Yeah.
So I would not, unless you want to specify everyone moving up to 70%, it would just...
I'm just saying, if it's 50 plus one for the other ones, is that implicit in this one? Because it's not a township. It's not located in a township. Are we going to be using...
I would think by the motion it would be implicit that it's 50 plus one.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, so let's call the motion on the question as amended. Those in favor, show of hands. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's the motion is to be it resolved that the Langley Seniors Resource Center be added to the list of community hall facilities eligible to apply for annual Township of Langley grants. And what was the amendment?
That'll meet all criteria, all of the grant criteria, but for its location, which would be in the city.
Yeah. Okay, so all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're just about at time, so I'm going to ask for a deferral of B3.
I'll defer B3 to the afternoon meeting when we discuss I-1.
Yeah, okay. Is there a seconder to the deferral?
I-1 is a motion.
Yeah. Okay. All right, you're seconding it? Okay, any discussion on that?
I'll just explain maybe.
Okay, let me just turn your mic on. There you go.
Thank you. Just a brief explanation, because it seems there is a notice of motion in the afternoon meeting by Councillor Arneson regarding long-term funding strategy for critical infrastructure, and this could be just discussed in light of that, or we could defer it further, but it may be packaged together. So that's why I thought maybe without sending it off to another CPC meeting, just throw it in when we discuss I-1, and then we can deal with it then. But it may work. And there's my discussions with Mr. Backen earlier on dealing with this. So had we had the time, I would have asked for that referral anyways. Thank you.
Yeah.
As the mover of the motion, I want to say that I drafted and submitted the motion prior to the agenda item coming forward. And so when I read it, I thought to myself, this is very much an integral part of the overall discussion of having a strategy. I mean, it is a separate component in a way, but I think that it would be well served by having a broader discussion, and they are very complementary to each other, so I don't have a problem with that. But I will obviously have a lot to say about the motion per se.
Okay. All right, so call the question. All in favor of deferring to the afternoon meeting? Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to terminate. Termination. Thank you to Councillor Davis. Second, Mayor Froese. All in favor? We are terminated. Thank